Convened meeting of the Greer City Council. We have convened this evening, September the 26th, 2023, for the purpose of the City Council meeting. With that, I will ask Councilwoman Judy Albert, if she would, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by an invocation for council. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we do thank you for this day that you've given us. We thank you for the beautiful weather. We thank you for our city and all the employees that we do have. We pray that it be your will that you will just continue to bless us as we go. And we pray, dear Lord, that you will lead, guide, and direct us in this meeting. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we'll proceed on with the meeting. We do have a time that we set aside at the first of every meeting called Public Forum. This is an opportunity for citizens of this city to address council for items that will appear later on in our agenda. We have a couple of folks that have indicated that they want to speak this evening, and we'll afford them that opportunity. When I call your name, if you would, please come to the podium and state your name and address. We like to get that as a matter of record, and if you're at the podium, your remarks will be recorded as well, too. We only have two folks that want to speak tonight, one in regards to two different ordinances, but that's fine. We just ask that you be cognizant of the time and the issues that you want to present to us. We will not reply at this point in time, but we'll have an opportunity to discuss possibly your concerns as we get further into the agenda to the items that you want to speak to. With that, Kathleen Duval is our first speaker.
Good evening. My name is Kathleen DeVix, and I have residence at 134 Park Avenue in Greer. I actually am here to address both of the ordinances about the Victor Park, both the rezoning and the removal of the overlay district. With regard to the zoning, I would raise the same three concerns I raised a month ago, that our concerns in the Victor Park or the Park Avenue towns is that number one are the roads. Park Avenue is inadequate. It's really a one-way street. You can't have any parking unless a car either is in a driveway or parallel parked up onto a sidewalk. And when you have 280 apartments with two different entrances accessing Park Avenue, we see a very difficult situation. And we trust the city to look at it and whether to make it two-way, how to control the parking, but we don't want to end up with a parking and traffic nightmare. The second really big concern is screening. And I did look at both the screening for multifamily housing and how it changed from the current code to what it will be under the existing code, and at the setbacks. And I would share my observation that when it comes to the setbacks under the existing code, the setback for the front of the building changes depending on the nature of the street, so that it goes all the way from a 20-foot setback up to a 50-foot setback if that multifamily housing is on an arterial street. You don't see that under the UDO. In terms of screening, I really wonder about the screening because you have adequate screening under the existing code in terms of the height of the screening and the density of the shrubbery. I don't see that under the UDO. And that's the one thing that built existing residences really want to be a buffer from CBD type or downtown development. Also, I wanted to point out that in the central business district where multifamily dwelling, well, that multifamily dwelling seems to be an exception, and the screening was provided there. But again, I don't see that kind of screening requirement under the UDO. And in Park Avenue, we're wondering, there's a proposed development to change Park Avenue to Central Business District. It will soon become a new district under the UDO, and we have multifamily, high-density housing, multifamily being presented. And my last point is simply that the removal of the overlay district. Under the existing code, there are overlay districts. There's historic, there's transitional, and there's another one. From what I can see, the Victor Park area is not an historic district. We're transitional. But under the UDO, the only time any credence, any provision is made for an overlaying or underlying zoning or district is with the historical areas. And I think that there needs to be protection for the transitional areas where you have existing residential housing. And those are my 3 points. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Hickman, Amy Hickman.
My name is Amy Hickman. I live at 240 Old Woodruff Road. I share some similar concerns, and I'll try not to repeat to the extent possible. Again, the C1 zoning that is the Central Business District, that change would exempt this development from any of the buffer that is provided by the Highway 101 overlay. And understand these are intersecting proposals that have a lot of overlap, and it can get very confusing, especially for someone who's very new to zoning in actual fact. This is the C1 zoning also allows for, if I'm understanding it correctly, a 60-foot tall structure versus a 45-foot tall structure for a multifamily residence. And that changes the character of that part of the street considerably, considering that you have many single-family dwellings directly across the street. I am more concerned even about the Highway 101 overlay removal. I do understand that the downtown district overlay still exists, and that does have a great deal of guidance for architectural detail, but there is virtually nothing about landscaping detail in the downtown district. And I would say that makes it drastically different from what we would expect from this transitional neighborhood. Certainly, we have a lot of restrictions in the downtown overlay, but those restrictions are also responsible for the monster that ate Main Street, which I think a lot of us would agree is a little less than attractive. And I would definitely not want to see that kind of structure repeated on 101 on South Line Street. I think that's all. Thank you.
Excuse me. What I missed? What did you say right before you finished up about what you didn't want to repeat? I didn't hear that.
I would not like to see another apartment complex that looks like the apartments on Main Street facing the church, because I think that's an eyesore.
Thank you. Council, with that, let's move to the minutes of the council meeting. You have in your packet the minutes from September the 12th, 2023. I'll entertain a motion that they be received.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any items of note for the clerk? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Council departmental reports are contained in your packet this evening. You have access to those and to the administrator for questions. We have Susan Howell to join us this evening with the financial report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Give you a brief financial summary of the financials as of August the 30th, 2023. Starting out with the general fund, the year-to-date revenue is $3,095,000. The total year-to-date expenditures are $6,949,000, which is 2% over budget right now. but the cash balance in the general fund is $16,976,000. Moving on to the hospitality fund, the year-to-date revenue is $631,000. The year-to-date expenditures are $2,149,000, and the cash balance in the account is $1,058,000. And finally, the stormwater fund, the year-to-date revenue is $30,000. The expenditures are $1,268,000, and the cash balance in the stormwater fund is $1,760,000. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Questions? Comments? Thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Council, let's move to the administrator's report. Mr. Merriman.
Mr. Mayor, council, thank you and good evening. A few things I want to touch base with you all on tonight. Just two announcements. First of all, a reminder that this weekend here in City Park is Rail Fest. It'll be held between 10 and 2 a.m. to celebrate Greer's Railroad history. That is always a well-attended and great event for the city. Again, that's this Saturday, the 30th, between 10 and 2. Also want to remind you that there's an art exhibition in honor of Hispanic and Latino Heritage Month that will be held at the Edward R. Drigger City of Greer Center for the Arts on Friday the 6th of October between 6 and 8. So there will be a reception. So kind of look at our Parks and Rec tourism webpage specific to our Cultural Arts Center for a little bit more information on that, but we're excited to host that event. Quick reminder that the safety breakfast that we hold annually will be on the 5th and 6th of October, next Thursday and Friday morning. We start at 7:30. So if you haven't signed up, I would ask that you do so. I think there's an email requesting your sign up to reserve your spot for one of those 2 days. And then finally, the city, this is a reminder on the UDO, that the city hosted 5 public meetings for the UDO over 2 days on the 13th and 14th of September. And we clocked about 100, actually a little more than 100 participants come through. So as far as our next steps go, staff is working with the consultant, with Kimley Horn, to review those public comments, look to potentially incorporate those into the adoption draft. So another reminder, so if you'd like to schedule time to meet with staff to discuss the plan, I would ask that you do so, so we can have a little bit of one-on-one time, ask some of the specific questions that I know that continue to come up in advance of council's consideration of this document towards through the end of October and through November. So our staff stands ready to assist you, but I do want to say thank you for your participation in this process so far, and I also want to thank the members of the public that attended. We had 5 meetings over 2 days and had over 100 participants. So for public, as far as public meetings go, that was pretty good. Also want to thank staff for the long hours that they put in answering those questions, because I know it was a couple long days. Mr. Mayor, unless there's any specific questions, that concludes my report.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
In regards to the UDO, I'd like to ask the administrator to have the staff prepare. Some of us had submitted questions and possible changes to the UDO. Since it's such an enormous document, before we get to any point of discussion as far as voting, I'd like to see how staff has answered the questions, or if they've made changes in the document itself, because it took me just several days to go through the whole thing. So if staff could help us out with that, that would be wonderful.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Others? With that, let's move to old business. We have 2 items before us this evening in old business, the first of which is the second and final reading of ordinance number 24-2023. It's an ordinance to change the zone classification of a certain property owned by Bloom Investments, LLC, located at 310 Buncombe Street from R12 to R7.5. Any new or additional information in regards to the second reading of ordinance number 24-2023?
No.
With that, then, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
And a second. Floor is open for discussion. Questions? Comments? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Second and final reading of ordinance number 25-2023. This is an ordinance to provide for the annexation of certain property owned by Apric 14 LLC located on Wade Hampton Boulevard by 100% petition and to establish a zoning classification of C2 commercial district for said property. Any new or additional information, Ms. Stahl, on that?
Planning Commission held a public hearing for this item on September 18th, and they recommended approval.
As you heard, it comes with a recommendation for approval. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion. Comments? Questions?
Do they know what's going to go there yet? Have they made a decision on what type
A
of business?
mattress store and perhaps another retail type store. That's all we know.
That's all. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Others? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you. Council, let's move to items of new business, the first of which is the bid summary for the Greer Golf Synthetic Turf application. The Parks and Recreation and Tourism Department solicited bids for the application of synthetic turf to the driving range at Greer Golf. Staff recommends the bid be awarded to Sepco Synthetic Solutions, LLC. Mr. Watson joins us for that conversation. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is a request for the approval of a bid to install synthetic turf to our driving range tee at the golf course. The installed product will be 294 feet long, so basically the entire length of the driving range upper tee. It'll be 7 foot wide with a 6-inch border. Mandatory pre-bid meeting on August 30th. We had, I think, 4 companies attended. Opened bids on September 12th, and we have 1 submission, which is before you, Sepco Synthetic Solutions. We've checked their references, past project history. They are a City of Greer business with a history of providing excellent service and product. This project is budgeted, and we'll finalize and close out our 2 outstanding PARD grants, and we're recommending approval.
Council, for the purpose of discussion, this comes with a recommendation for approval. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
And a second. Floor is open for discussion.
Mr. Watson, are we just after durability? Is that kind of the idea behind this project?
So why would we do it?
In the T area, I think.
So we've had so much activity on our driving range, we built a secondary tee to sort of help with that. And even that does not handle the amount of activity we have in the winter. Bermuda grass, after you hit it, it doesn't really start growing back until the spring. So this would allow us to close off the natural turf area during the winter, have people hit from the synthetic turf, and then when we get into the growing season, we won't have to worry about top dressing and regrowing the Bermuda turf. We can sort of save it through the winter, and it'll be ready to open in the spring.
Others?
It's impossible to speculate. Any idea why we only got 1 bid?
I do not. I was pleased with the mandatory pre-bid turnout with 4 companies. They were from other states, I believe, so I haven't received any feedback as why or why not.
Cost you feel is in line with the project itself, what we anticipated for the project?
Yes, sir, absolutely. We did a lot of research beforehand, and this is what we were expecting.
Others? Questions? Comments? Discussion? Hearing none. Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Airwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert,
Yes.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Second item is another bid for services, painting for police and courts facility. Bids were solicited for repainting the majority of the police and courts facility. We received abundance of interest from contractors on the project. You can read about those. Mr. Gugelhauer joins us at this time, our facilities and projects manager, to give us an overview of that process. Floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, good evening, council. Good evening, Mayor. This project is actually the first phase of just routine maintenance. We're due now for a paint update at the police and courts. Chief Hamby had requested and looked at different samples and picked out what he'd wanted. As you stated, Mayor, this is for a majority of the police and courts building, but not all of it. The accent walls will not be painted. There will be nothing done in the detention area, the dispatch, or in the courtrooms themselves, but everything else, just about every other wall, will get a new coat of paint. The chief has selected a gray, the kind of the same stuff that's at the Operations Center now, that same shade. Eventually, we'll follow that up with some new carpeting as well to bring that kind of up to par. But this is for the painting section. The contractor has been contacted, is available upon council's approval.
Comes with a recommendation from staff. I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So motion.
And a second.
Second.
Floor is open for questions.
There's a big variety in bids there, wasn't there?
Yes, ma'am, there were
From
7 bids.
55,000 up to 200,000?
Yes, ma'am. And I don't know what they obviously didn't want the work at that amount. I don't even know what they were thinking. Everybody walked through, so everybody heard the same scope. Everybody got the same information. I don't know why that's such a spread.
But it is written out. Everybody's going to do the same thing?
Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Same number of coats of paint or whatever?
The DB Painting who you're proposing that we go with, have they ever done any work for us or folks we know?
No, sir. They're from Greenville, but they have not done anything that I'm aware of.
Do we have any references on this?
Yes, we did contact some references and make sure that they are very good at maintaining their workspace, which was a major concern. Also, they've agreed to take their wet brushes and everything out, so we don't have to worry about all that. And they were easy to work with, so that was the recommendations I got.
Further questions?
How do we decide what surfaces were going to be painted or not?
That was primarily handled by Chief Hamby. No, part of it was that, like for in the dispatch, there can't really be a disruption, and he really wasn't needed at that point. So a lot of those type factors were determining as to what got done currently. We wanted to do as much at one time as possible. If there are other pieces that we do at a separate time, we can kind of onesie-twosie that as needed.
Others? Comments? Questions? Discussion? Hearing none, Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Earwood,
Yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Miss Albert, Mayor Danner.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Third item before us this evening is the first reading of ordinance number 26-2023. This is an ordinance to change the zoning classification of a certain property owned by the city of Greer located at 108 South Line Street from R7.5 to C1. Ms. Stahl joins us for this conversation. Floor is yours.
Yes, so this is for docket number RZ2307. The address is 108 South Line Street. The existing zoning is R75, single-family residential, and the request is to rezone to C1 Central Business District. Here's the aerial of the site. Here's the current zoning map. The current zoning is R75. The surrounding zoning is C1 Central Business District in the light pink. Here's the future land use. It's downtown living. Here's a photo of the current conditions of the site. Once again, the request is to rezone from R75 to C1 Central Business District. The surrounding zoning and land uses are C1 and C2 and R75, and staff recommends approval, and Planning Commission also recommended approval.
Council, for the purpose of discussion, I'll entertain a motion to receive.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Floor is now open for discussion.
What is the reasoning behind asking for C1?
C1 is a multi-use zoning district. It's sort of live, work, play. So it allows for multifamily residential as well as business uses.
Okay, and I understand that. I was just, the narrative in the ordinance talks about to be used as an apartment complex.
That is the intent.
But that wouldn't require C1, correct?
C1 is most appropriate because it is adjacent with C1, so it seems more appropriate than RM1 or RM2.
But if they decide to not build apartments, it leaves it open to what could be built, right?
Correct. There's no guarantee it'll be apartments.
Did the buyer of the property, did they change their plans, or was it originally to be townhomes, or was it always apartments? Or?
No, as the property owner, we is through the development agreement and as terms of the purchase and sale agreement, it will be multifamily. If it isn't multifamily, then we are not under no obligation to sell the property. So to your point, Mr. Best, you're absolutely right. In any other circumstance, it could potentially be C2 and become commercial. But in this case, the city is the property owner. And in this particular case, I would not recommend that at this time. I would recommend.
This is also the point where I typically would ask if the owner, representative of the owner of the property is with us this evening. He obviously is, and Mr. Merriman will answer questions on behalf of the city at this point. So it's entirely appropriate that he lend us guidance in questions that may be most appropriate answered by him. So
You would recommend what?
I would not. The intent behind the transfer of this property is for the development of multifamily to continue our diversified housing options downtown. So I don't think that selling the park for commercial development and zoning it up for commercial development alone is something that I would even consider at this time. So this zoning is appropriate, as Ms. Stahl articulated, because it's adjacent to other C1. It is transitional for that live, work, play environment. The potential for some commercial use on the property to complement the residential still exists. So all of those things being considered, the recommendation for this particular rezoning is C1.
Allows for small restaurant, et cetera, is the idea there.
Yes, sir.
But that, like was mentioned, would come without certain greens, grass, whatever, bushes and borders and.
Go ahead.
So there will be parking landscaping requirements that they'll need to adhere to. But because it will be C1, anything adjacent to C1, there won't be a buffer between those properties. There will be a buffer to the south where there is different zoning.
But there would not be a buffer on the back street?
No, sir. Because it's all C1 zoning. We can recommend, but we cannot require.
So the existing apartments back there are in a commercial district?
Correct. They are C1.
Along Park is what we're talking about, so I'm clear.
I'm sorry.
Is that what you're talking about?
Along Park Avenue, yes.
So is there any, in the agreement with the proposed developers, is there any buffering or screening or requirements of those?
That will be required to adhere to the zoning regulations as set forth. And we haven't, at this time, there's not been a finalized plan submitted for that particular portion of the property.
So they'll be required to go by the existing regulations?
Yes, sir.
Which is nothing, right?
In this particular case, yes, sir.
Well, that doesn't seem good.
Has there been any indication that there would be any improvements to the road
There,
in the back, the Park Avenue?
the developer is currently working on acquiring additional parcels, as I understand it, which would dictate further development of all of it, of not just the 5 acres that the city owns that are in question now, but other parcels. So the final design would be predicated on the successful obtaining of those other parcels. So to answer your question, Mr. Best, I can't specifically speak to those buffering requirements, et cetera, because there's more than just this particular parcel in play.
So if this failed and somebody came along and wanted to put a Circle K there, they could do it without buffering?
No, sir.
Provided, go ahead.
Not in C1.
Not in C1?
Not in C1.
And provided we would sell it to them for the purposes of a Circle K.
Yeah.
What would C1 cover?
C1 is mostly uses you see downtown. So neighborhood shops, nothing so intense as a gas station. Read off some to you. Antique shop, candy store, dance studio, florist shop, government office and uses, newsstand, pharmacy, and so forth. So mostly uses you already see downtown.
But again, the underlying zoning is predicated on the property owner's willingness to transfer the property or sell it for any other use that it then exists on it now.
In other words, if we rezoned, this didn't go forward for some reason, we still control what goes there.
Yes, sir.
Because we as
Yes, sir.
city
It's still a
control the
park.
property.
Yes, sir. Still a park. So in theory, the underlying zoning doesn't matter so long as we're the property owner and make a determination on how it's going to be disposed. And then the subsequent use after disposal of the property.
So in the development agreement, could we require buffering and setbacks and screening?
In theory, yes, sir, we could. Yeah, but the purchase sale agreement and the development agreement is going to be centered on the rights that they would have under zoning and property development. So I could certainly require that through the development agreement that y'all would ultimately approve. So it can be added. I will say that in discussions I've had with them, they are sensitive to the residents over there at those townhomes, and they recognize that it is adjacent to that. So there is a sensitivity to that existing use. But as it exists now, they got a wall of the Victor Gym in front of their townhomes as well. So there's certainly going to be a sensitivity to integrating those adjacent uses to the overall design. What that looks like, I haven't seen.
If it was to stay the apartments or townhomes or whatever there, then it would remain the residence or 5 or 7, whatever. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
if it was to remain the apartments themselves or townhomes, then it would remain under residence, right?
It would still need to be
The
rezoned.
apartment complex does not have to be C1, does it?
It would have to be C1 for
Apartment
multifamily.
complex is C1?
For multifamily, yes, ma'am.
Just because of its location, is that what you're saying? Because multifamily, that we can't do C1 outside the downtown district, so.
Correct. It's also because of its location.
Okay. I got a few items. One, we heard someone speak tonight about the width of Park Street. So we don't, that possibly would, because we have a requirement that streets have to come up to city standards. I don't know if the width meets our standards. That was forever a one-lane road. And then when the townhomes were constructed, I don't know if that was part of it, but I'm not even sure it was widened. But we'll be looking at that, correct?
Yes, I would imagine that still stands for this project. Any part along their frontage, they'll have to widen to city standards.
Okay. I realize that with we just don't like change. People don't like change, and I got that. That's very understandable. Just know that there's some things there that could stop the deal. We have a railroad right away on that property that would have to be worked out for the railroad kind of holds the key to that. And if the railroad wanted to, they could come in and put a spur. That's the reality of that, I believe. This site was next to, I don't believe the oil mill was on that site. It was across the street. But there was a lot of things that have been there over the years, and I understand angst about what may or may not be, or what may or may not come. I have said to a lot of people, and I've said it publicly, and I'll say it again, in order for this, if this development takes place, if somebody asked me today, Jay, if you want to put money on it, is it going to take place? Right now, I'd say no. And that the only reason is because I've seen enough things happen in years past that made a deal fall apart. But I think this right now is a box to be checked. And as you heard tonight, there are questions about what's going on, and your concerns don't fall on deaf ears. My question is more, I like C1 because I believe in, especially the area that one of the characteristics of Greer is that in the I guess you would say old Greer, that it was a combination of single family, multifamily, businesses, industry. It was all, and I know that over time we have tried to separate all that, and sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. I like the idea of having a small grocery store that you can walk to, or a little restaurant you could go to. I think that's great, and I think that's what applies here. And I believe I'm going to support C1, but I do have a question. Assuming that the development agreement is approved by all parties, and the transfer of land is made to the development company, what happens? Is there a restriction of that property being sold to another developer with a different idea?
No, sir. The intent of the parties is that it be developed specifically as a multifamily.
No, I understand that. But what I'm saying,
so is if
developer A, who we're dealing with now says, yes, we agree to all the terms and conditions. The property is transferred to them.
The development agreement should rule.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the development agreement is predicated on the development of a multifamily, and if it doesn't happen that way, it doesn't happen.
Okay, so if they say, for whatever reason, they no longer exist, and developer B becomes a property, is the language of that development agreement going to transfer?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It cannot become a Circle K to use,
Well,
or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, no.
Understand, okay.
If that was the case, then no development agreement would really kind of carry any water, because then it's a bait and switch on everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's remember as well that this entire concept is not foreign to some of us at this table. This type of development was foreseen and in some regards planned 15 to 20 years ago. It never came to fruition for a number of reasons, but you know, this is not a new idea, and that's reflected as well in our comprehensive plan. And I think if we go back and look at that and look at what we envision for the 101 entrance into the city, that at one point in time, from certainly 80 on in, and maybe even further back than that, we envisioned that 101 would be commercial all the way into town, and I think that what we see here is the beginning of that as it works its way back out of town. I would envision that you're going to see more and more, particularly as we continue to develop south of 85 and people come into town. We'll see more in the way of commercial development along that whole corridor right there. And in fact, we've got that in our long range plans. It's difficult for us as council people, and certainly for the public, to in some regards, you know, we're not buying a pig in a poke. We've got some direction here about how we want to go about it. And while we don't have all the answers, there comes a point in time where there's going to be a need for us and for the public to trust that we're going to do what's best in the city's interest. And I think some of the things that we have talked about, and certainly to your point, Jay, the consideration of that road, the consideration of some other things, maybe possibly even screening. But I think, to me, those are the kinds of things that we work out as we move along. I'm not sure that having a lengthy discussion about screening at this particular point in time is entirely needed or even appropriate, since we have no layout about what the project may even look like. I mean, we don't know which way it's going to face, or what the ends of the buildings will be facing, or if it's going to be facing 101, or, you know, we don't know how it's going to be oriented. The other reason that we liked the concept so much, and you mentioned this as well too, is that this is going to give us the ability to create community, to create neighborhood down there. And I don't know that, you know, walling off every housing piece that gets done in there, and particularly around, as this project may go, around that block square area there, that we want it all cut off, because I think the whole idea is that we want access to Trade Street and to the ability to get uptown, where we can do some sort of signalization at the track or other means of getting people safely into town from there, is going to be imperative. And that may mean that we are reworking roads, we are putting in new sidewalk, we are changing ingress and egress to that area. I just think we're a long ways from making some of those decisions at this particular point.
I agree that we are a ways away, and I will support the rezoning, but I will not support a development agreement that does not address what we've talked about tonight.
In particular?
Well, we've talked about screening, we've talked about landscaping. We haven't talked about landscaping, but it was brought up. Just all those issues that were brought before us. I think it's ludicrous for us to ultimately sell this piece of property unless we know exactly what they're going to do there and how they're going to do it.
Well, and I think that's the intent of the development agreement.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'll support the C1, but I've got to see a good development agreement before I'll go any further.
Well, I think that's where we trust the administrator and we trust this council.
Well, and to your point about 15 years ago, there is no way we could have foreseen things like making North Main Street and Poinsett Street single lane 15 years ago. There's no way we could have foreseen a lot of things that have happened.
Well, I mean, somebody foresaw putting apartments down there.
You know, I know of some commercial developments that were turned down right there.
Okay, fair enough.
I would like to say that, and it's not, it's in the same subject, but it's not really anything about the well, maybe it is about the zoning, but this is part, and we've talked about this, of a much, this is a spoke in the wheel of the city that's turning, and our city is growing by leaps and bounds, and we have to do all we can to manage the growth. We do not want to be in the shape that some folks are where the growth is managing them. One of the reasons we're looking at liquidating that is because we're having to look at building new facilities that will serve the needs of our growing community. And making that clear, because a lot of people don't, I hear comments, people are selling, the city's selling it just because it's dollar signs. That's far from it. It's growing pains, I guess, and we're trying to do the best that we can to put to find someone to develop it that is going to benefit District 1, this is my district, the downtown, and then the entire city. And I know everyone here at this table is going to do their dead level best to make the best development happen. If we get to that point, like I say, it could fall apart. But C1, although right now it doesn't have any buffers required, there are ways that if you were to build multifamily, that it would be, I think, acceptable, just like you were living in a subdivision where your neighbors lived right across the street. You could position the buildings where the entrances were faced Park Street, or depending on what the back of the buildings look like, maybe that would be preferable. I don't know. But I think there's ways to address it, and everybody's heard council speak tonight, and I believe, and I certainly say with confidence, that we all have the best intentions to make sure anything that happens in the city is for the best interest of the city as a whole. So,
others? Comments? Questions? Further discussion? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Earwood,
yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
No.
Mayor Danner.
Yes. We'll move to the next item of new business, the first reading of ordinance number 27-2023. This is an ordinance to amend the City of Greer Highway 101 corridor overlay zoning map established by Article 5, Section 514 of the City of Greer zoning ordinances by removing certain properties identified herein from the City of Greer 101 corridor overlay. Ms. Stahl, information please.
The docket number is RZ 2308. The address is 108 South Line Street. And the request is to remove the Highway 101 overlay and retain the downtown overlay. Here's the aerial of the property. Here's the current zoning map. Here is a photo on the left of the downtown overlay in blue and the Highway 101 overlay in brown. And you can see how there are two overlays on the one parcel. Here's a photo of the current conditions of the site. So once again, the request is a zoning map amendment to remove the Highway 101 overlay and retain the downtown overlay. Staff recommends approval, and Planning Commission also recommended approval.
For the purpose of discussion comes with a recommendation for approval. I entertain a first reading of ordinance number 27-2023.
So move.
Second.
Floor is open for discussion.
So could you briefly tell us what the advantage is to changing this?
So the downtown overlay is more strict about build materials, and it's more cohesive with the larger downtown overlay, which is complementary to the historic district overlay and meant to like transition out. The Highway 101 overlay I would describe as more focused on auto uses and buffering and screening, and it addresses things like parking.
That's pretty important.
It is important, but they kind of dictate where the parking is located. And it's difficult for staff if there's conflicts between two overlays to decide, fairly how to apply one over the other.
This is exactly what I referred to just a minute ago, and this ordinance is actually an advantage to some of the concerns that we've heard discussed this evening, some of the questions that have arisen. Others?
How do you equate it being an advantage to doing this?
Well, the Highway 101 overlay, to Ms. Stahl's point, is auto-centric. And for changes that we anticipate or could be potentially initiated by development in that area there as you come into town, and one of the reasons that we thought about this project from the beginning is a transitional sort of way to enter the town. This makes this less auto-centric in some regards than others, and I would anticipate that while we won't do anything necessarily from 80 on in different than the 101 overlay, because we know most of that is going to be commercial at some point, we may be able to look at doing something from, say, Snow Street on in, where we do improvements to 101 that would be consistent with the downtown. Certainly maybe even, landscaping and other improvements to that area as it comes into that critical intersection there at 290 and 101. I would anticipate that that's something that we're going to be addressing in the next 4 years.
Okay, give me your definition then again of the two again.
So the downtown overlay focuses more on build materials. So think of like siding. It needs to be brick, wood, cementitious siding. The paint is restricted to particular paint colors of a historical nature. The Highway 101 overlay is more oriented towards businesses and their parking, where it's located, their buffering and screening along 101. Not as strict with the paint colors. It's a little more generic. They can use 2 paint colors, but they're not specific to the historical nature of them. So that's pretty much it. There's some signage.
The downtown overlay may be a little bit more protective over what is actually built. Is that correct? I mean, as far as the exterior.
Yes, it's a little more strict.
Yeah.
And I like to simplify it like this, and I wish our zoning could be this simple, but I know it can't be. But if it's C1, which is downtown, it needs to look like downtown. Having said that, we have brought some things that are in C1 now that if they wanted to build the same thing, it would not be there. And it's within eyeshot of here. So, but if it's C1, it should look like downtown, whether you use a masonry, exterior, colors aren't a real big deal to me because, anyway, that's a different discussion.
Garage doors on the front.
Do what?
Or garage doors on the front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyway, if it looks like downtown,
That's correct. So with the UDO, the downtown overlay will become the downtown transitional overlay because it's meant to be a transition to the historic district that is Trade and some of Poinsett. And then the 101 overlay will become part of our gateway overlay, which will extend on the 5 corridors leading into downtown. So it'll become a more comprehensive overlay network that works well together.
Questions? Comments? Discussion? Ms. Duncan?
Mr. Earwood,
yes.
Mr. Booker,
Yes.
Mr. Hopper,
Yes.
Mr. Bettis,
Yes.
Ms. Albert,
The only question, well, I guess it's too late to ask a question, so I'll say no.
Mayor Danner.
Yes.
Never too late.
Thank you, ma'am. Council, we have no stated business in executive session this evening. Stand adjourned.